India is on the verge of an election, just as its economy is slowing. It's not a happy predicament for the ageing government of Manmohan Singh. Pradeep Mehta is the Secretary-General of Cuts International, one of India's largest consumer groups, and was recently a member of a panel of experts appointed by the World Trade Organization to help get global trade liberalisation back on track. Pradeep Mehta, welcome to the studio. Before we talk about trade, let's take a moment to talk about your own country and its economy. The rupee is falling, growth is at a 10-year low. Can the Indian economy recover without another dose of economic reform, and at a time when you're in the midst of the hurly-burly of an election campaign?
See, the problem of the rupee falling and the low growth rate, which is there is a correlation between both. And the fact is that the US tapering took place, so it sent all the markets into jitters. In India, what has happened is high corruption scandals, which sort of created what we call the policy paralysis. And as a result of that, implementation slowed down. It's not so much as reforms per se, but the implementation of the existing reforms itself.
But given the public outrage and concern and increasing support for concerted action against corruption, shouldn't that encourage politicians to act to improve transparency, to get rid of corruption, to get rid of regulation, rather than the opposite?
Well, they're trying to do that, but the fact is what happened was that the bureaucracy went into a kind of reverse track. I remember a Secretary to the Government of India telling me once that the officers are nowadays watching their backs instead of the files.
And is it the case then that we really have to wait until the election is resolved to discover whether or not the government loses, a new administration comes in, before we can expect the paralysis that you described to come to an end?
Yes, indeed. I mean, there is a very strong desire for change in the government, because this government has come to its sort of expiry date. Dr. Manmohan Singh should have walked out, should have resigned some time ago, but he did not. Well, at least the government is making noises about controlling corruption and so on.
I wonder whether I could ask you this. As I understand it, you are something of a skeptic of regionalism when it comes to trade, and yet I think it's fair to say that both APEC and ASEAN's outreach to other countries, China, Japan, India notably, have been successful to a degree in opening up trade, reducing trade barriers in the Asia-Pacific, and consequently are behind or are one of the reasons why this part of the world has done better in recent years than Europe and the United States, for example.
I agree. I mean, I'm not a skeptic of the non-multilaterals. I mean, there could be bilaterals and regional trade agreements. But the problem is that, how can they be coherent with the world trading system? I mean, that is the biggest challenge, which also are...
Well, isn't the argument that it's better to have some agreement than none, and that if you can then integrate what's happening in Asia and the Pacific, and that is a fair enough point, isn't it?
Fair enough. I mean, even if you look at India and Australia, and they're also sort of part of the same bandwagon. There is this TPP, Trans-Pacific Partnership.
I was going to ask you about that. I mean, is there any possibility that the Trans-Pacific Partnership, Washington's baby, can be a success without China? Could it be a success with China?
I suppose the design behind TPP is to keep China out, and I don't think it will be successful. In any event, countries like Australia and Japan are going to find it very difficult to digest the US prescription as to how TPP is going to... And mind you, the TPP is not, it's an exclusive agreement. You can't, anybody else cannot join. On the contrary, there is another agreement which is happening in Asia Pacific, ASEAN plus 5, which includes India, Australia and Japan. It is an inclusive agreement that anybody can join it later on as you like. And the evolution of this RCEP agreement, or Regional Comprehensive Economic Partnership, is based upon trust, in the sense that, what are you willing to liberalize? Why don't you put that on the table, and then we can move forward on that basis, rather than something being shoved down your throat that this is what has to be done. The biggest problem with a large number of US-led trade agreements, whether they're, including all their bilaterals, are all TRIPS plus. They want very high standards of intellectual property protection, which I don't think many countries, including Australia or Japan, would necessarily agree with in the context of TPP. So I'm not very confident as to how TPP will go. On the other hand, you have this transatlantic trade and investment treaty, which is also undergoing negotiations. Now, between US and Europe, if you look at the tariffs, they're down to about 3%. I mean, the tariffs are not an issue. So it's the regulatory standards which is being, which they're speaking about. And if you look at the major disputes in the WTO between the US and EU, who have occupied most of the space, have been on regulatory issues, hormone in beef and stuff like that. So I don't know whether they can get a deal at all or not.
Fair enough. We had better leave it there. Pradeep, Mehta, thank you very much indeed.
Thank you. Thank you very much.